The champagne glass shattered against my workshop wall, sending crystal fragments across the concrete floor like fallen stars. Elena stood in the doorway of my custom furniture shop, her designer heels clicking against sawdust, holding divorce papers in one hand and our 7-year-old daughter's overnight bag in the other. "Marcus told me about his new venture capital fund," she said, voice sharp as the broken glass. $500 million, Nathan. "And what do you have?" "Wood shavings and callused hands." She dropped the papers on my workbench, kissed Sofia's forehead, and walked toward the black Tesla waiting in the rain. I watched my family disappear into the Seattle night, not knowing that 3 blocks away, a registered letter waited in my mailbox that would change everything. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Nathan Torres, and for 15 years my world smelled of cedar shavings and wood stain. I wasn't born into money, just inherited my grandfather's steady hands and his stubborn belief that creating something beautiful was worth more than any paycheck. My custom furniture shop sat in the Fremont district, tucked between a vintage bookstore and a coffee roastery that filled the air with the scent of dark roast and possibility. The space wasn't much to look at from the outside. Peeling paint on the storefront, a hand-painted sign that said Torres Fine Woodworking in letters I'd carved myself. But inside, magic happened. Dining tables that would host Christmas dinners for generations, bookshelves that would hold family treasures. Each piece bore my signature, a small phoenix carved into an inconspicuous corner, because I believed every creation deserved to rise from raw materials into something eternal. Elena used to love watching me work. In the early days of our marriage, she'd bring coffee and sit on the sawhorses, sketching in her art pad while I shaped oak and cherry into furniture that would outlast us both. She said my hands could coax poetry from dead trees. Back then my workshop felt like our sanctuary, a place where dreams took shape under fluorescent lights. But dreams don't pay for private schools or designer clothes or the kind of social circle Elena started craving. As her interior design business grew, so did her expectations. She wanted granite countertops and vacations to Tuscany. I wanted to perfect the curve of a chair back and teach Sofia how to sand with the grain. Somewhere between her first big client and her third networking gala, we stopped speaking the same language. The house we lived in told our story in reverse. Elena had redecorated 3 times in 2 years, each renovation erasing more traces of the man who built the custom cabinets in the kitchen and the built-in shelves in Sofia's bedroom. She hired other craftsmen now, men who charged twice what I would and delivered half the soul. When I pointed this out, she'd roll her eyes and mutter something about supporting the business community. Sofia became my refuge. At 7 she had Elena's dark eyes and my stubborn streak. After school she'd race into the shop, her backpack hitting the floor as she grabbed her child-sized safety glasses and asked what we were building today. I taught her to measure twice and cut once, to feel the grain of the wood before making the first cut, to understand that patience was the most important tool in any workshop. Elena hated the sawdust Sofia tracked through the house. She complained that our daughter would rather spend time with wood and tools than with dolls and dress-up clothes. "You're raising her to be a tomboy," she'd say, as if there was something shameful about a girl who could tell the difference between maple and mahogany by touch alone. I told Sofia that a woman who could create with her hands would never depend on anyone else for security. Elena stopped listening to my lessons long before she stopped pretending to care. The breaking point came on a Tuesday that started like any other. I was working on a dining set for a young couple, their first real furniture purchase. The husband had tears in his eyes when he described how his grandmother's table had been lost in a fire, how he wanted something that would become an heirloom for his own children someday. I spent 3 months on that set, selecting each board, joining each piece as if it were destined for my own home. Elena burst through the workshop door at 6:30, still wearing the black cocktail dress from another networking event I'd declined to attend. Her cheeks were flushed, whether from wine or excitement I couldn't tell. She held her phone like a weapon, the screen glowing with photos from the evening's festivities. "Do you see this?" she demanded, scrolling through images of marble-columned ballrooms and crystal chandeliers. "Marcus Hendricks just announced his new fund. $500 million in initial backing. $500 million, Nathan. And where were you tonight? Sanding chair legs like some medieval craftsman." I set down my chisel, wiping my hands on the shop apron that had belonged to my grandfather. I was finishing the Johnsons' dining set. "They're picking it up Friday." "The Johnsons?" She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "They're paying you what, $3,000 for 3 months of work?" Marcus closed a deal tonight worth more than you'll make in a lifetime. The words hit harder than any physical blow. I'd known Elena was growing restless, but I hadn't realized how deep her resentment ran. In her eyes I saw a stranger, someone who measured love in dollar signs and respectability in profit margins. The woman who used to trace the phoenix carved in my pieces now looked at me like I was nothing more than another piece of furniture gathering dust. That night, Sofia crawled into bed between us, her small body a bridge across the growing canyon in our marriage. She whispered about the jewelry box we were making together, how she wanted to carve her own phoenix in the corner. Elena pretended to sleep, but I felt her stiffen when Sofia talked about following in Daddy's footsteps. In the darkness I made a silent promise to my daughter. Whatever happened between her mother and me, she would never doubt that creating beauty with your own hands was worthy of respect. The end came 3 weeks later, on a Thursday night when the Seattle rain turned to sleet against the workshop windows. Elena appeared in the doorway like a verdict, her lawyer prepared, rustling with finality. She'd been planning this, I realized. The networking events, the late meetings, the way she'd started taking Sofia to play dates at Marcus's house where our daughter could see what real wealth looked like. I won't apologize for wanting more, she said, her voice steady as she watched me sweep wood shavings into a dustpan. Sofia deserves better than this, better than a father who thinks small and dreams smaller. She talked about custody arrangements and asset division as if our 15-year marriage was just another business transaction to be completed efficiently. Sofia would spend weekdays with her, weekends with me. The house would be sold, the proceeds split. As for my workshop, well, that was mine to keep. Elena's tone suggested she considered it more burden than asset. The papers felt heavier than any piece of timber I'd ever lifted. Dissolution of marriage, they read in cold legal typeface. I signed my name beside hers, the pen scratching across the signature line like nails on chalkboard. Through the window, I could see Marcus waiting in his Tesla, engine silent but headlights cutting through the rain like judgment. Elena kissed Sofia goodbye, promising ice cream sundaes and shopping trips, a new bedroom in Mommy's new apartment. Our daughter clung to me, confused by the suitcases and the tension crackling between her parents like electricity before a storm. I held her small body against my chest and whispered the same promise I'd made in the darkness weeks before. You are loved, completely and forever. Nothing will change that. The Tesla's brake lights disappeared into the Seattle night, carrying away the woman I'd built my life around and leaving me alone with a daughter who deserved better than broken promises and bitter custody battles.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
I locked the workshop door, checked it twice, and walked Sofia to my truck. At home I'd help her pack her overnight bag for the first of many journeys between two worlds that would never again feel complete. But as I turned the key in the ignition, my phone buzzed with a notification, email from a law firm I didn't recognize. The subject line read, "Urgent estate matter requires immediate attention." I almost deleted it, assuming it was spam or a phishing attempt. Instead, some instinct made me tap it open. The message was brief but formal. Mr. Torres, we represent the estate of your great-uncle Roberto Vega. Please contact our offices immediately regarding a matter of inheritance. Time-sensitive documentation requires your signature within 72 hours. Roberto Vega. I hadn't heard that name in 20 years, hadn't seen him since I was Sofia's age. My mother's uncle, the black sheep who disappeared to South America in the 70s and never looked back. Family legend said he'd made his fortune in mining operations, but those were just stories told at holiday dinners when the wine made everyone nostalgic for relatives they'd rather forget. I stared at the phone screen until the words blurred. An inheritance, arriving on the same night my marriage died. The timing felt like cosmic irony, or maybe like Providence wearing a disguise. Sofia stirred in her car seat, and I made a decision that would reshape everything I thought I knew about my life. Instead of driving straight home, I pulled into a 24-hour diner and called the number at the bottom of the email. A receptionist with a crisp professional voice confirmed what the message had claimed. Roberto Vega had passed away 6 months earlier in his mansion outside Bogota. His will, she said, contained specific provisions for his great-nephew in Seattle. Could I come in tomorrow morning to review the documentation? I agreed, my voice steady despite the tornado spinning in my chest. After hanging up, I sat in the truck listening to Sofia's peaceful breathing and the steady rhythm of rain on the windshield. Tomorrow I'd learn what Uncle Roberto had left behind. Tonight I'd tuck my daughter into bed in a house that would soon belong to strangers, trying to explain why Mommy wouldn't be there for breakfast. The law offices occupied the 15th floor of a downtown Seattle high-rise, all gleaming marble and floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of Elliott Bay. I dropped Sofia at school with extra hugs and promises to pick her up early for ice cream, my heart breaking as she asked if Mommy would be joining us. The elevator ride to the 15th floor felt like ascending toward either salvation or damnation. Margaret Chen, the estate attorney, looked like she'd stepped from the pages of a legal thriller. Silver hair pulled into a perfect chignon, wire-rimmed glasses that reflected the morning light streaming through those impossible windows. She gestured toward a conference table laden with documents thick enough to choke a horse. Your great-uncle was quite specific about his final wishes, she began, opening a file folder with my name typed neatly on the tab. Roberto Vega built his fortune through a combination of rare earth mining operations, strategic real estate investments, and what can only be described as an uncanny ability to identify emerging markets before they emerged. She handed me a bound document, pages heavy with legal language and financial figures that made my head spin. Mining rights in Colombia and Chile, commercial real estate in Miami and São Paulo, technology investments that had paid off beyond anyone's wildest projections. The numbers seemed impossible, too large to be real. The total estimated value of your inheritance, Margaret continued, her voice matter-of-fact as if she discussed fortunes worth hundreds of millions every morning before coffee, is approximately $423 million. The words hit me like a physical blow. I set the document down carefully, afraid my trembling hands might somehow make it all disappear. 423 million, more money than I'd ever imagined existing in one place, let alone belonging to someone with my last name. There's one condition, Margaret said, her expression growing serious. Roberto was adamant about this point. The inheritance comes with a mandatory confidentiality period. For 1 full year from the date you sign these papers, you cannot reveal your changed circumstances to anyone. No family members, no friends, no business associates. You live your life exactly as you did before, while we quietly transfer assets and establish the necessary financial structures. I stared at her, processing the implications. I can't tell Sofia, no one, Margaret repeated firmly. Roberto's instructions were very clear on this point. He believed sudden wealth corrupted character unless the recipient proved they could handle the responsibility with discretion. 1 year of silence, Mr. Torres. 1 year to demonstrate that you understand the difference between having money and being defined by it. The irony was so thick I could taste it. On the same night Elena left me for being poor, I'd inherited more wealth than Marcus Hendricks could dream of, but I couldn't tell a soul, couldn't use it to win her back or prove her wrong. For 365 days, I'd remain Nathan Torres, the struggling woodworker whose wife had traded up for a venture capitalist with deeper pockets. I signed the papers with hands that shook so badly Margaret offered me water. Each signature felt like stepping through a doorway into a parallel universe where I possessed unimaginable wealth while living the life of a man who had lost everything. The documents disappeared into manila folders, copies filed in multiple locations, the whole process as surreal as signing my own divorce papers had been. Walking back to my truck, downtown Seattle looked different somehow. The homeless man sleeping in the doorway of a closed shop, the woman counting change for her bus fare, the businessman checking his Rolex while talking loudly on his phone about quarterly projections. I wanted to help them all, to share this impossible windfall, but Roberto's conditions bound my hands as surely as chains. That afternoon, I picked Sofia up from school and took her for ice cream at her favorite parlor near Green Lake. She chattered about her art project and her best friend's upcoming birthday party, her 7-year-old concerns blissfully unaware that her father had become one of the wealthiest men in Washington state. I watched her attack a sundae bigger than her head, and made another silent promise. This money would never change who we were at our core. It would never make me the kind of man who measured love in dollars or success in stock portfolios. The weeks that followed tested every assumption I'd ever made about money and happiness. By day, I continued working in my shop, fulfilling existing orders and taking on new clients. The Johnsons picked up their dining set on schedule, the husband's eyes still misting as he ran his hands across the table's smooth surface. They paid me $3,000, and I deposited the check like always, even though I now had access to accounts worth more than some countries' annual budgets. Elena started her new life with characteristic efficiency. Sofia spent weekdays in her mother's Capitol Hill apartment, a sleek space with concrete floors and furniture that looked expensive but felt cold. Our daughter adapted with the resilience of children, but I could see the confusion in her eyes when she asked why Daddy couldn't afford the same kind of life Mommy now enjoyed. Different people value different things, I told her during one of our weekend visits to the workshop. Some people think the most important thing is having expensive stuff, other people think the most important thing is creating something beautiful that will last for. Sofia nodded solemnly, then asked if we could work on her jewelry box. I handed her the sandpaper and watched her small fingers smooth the cherry wood we'd chosen together. At 7 years old, she already understood the patience required to transform raw materials into something precious. Elena would never see the value in that lesson, but Sofia would carry it for. The hardest part of keeping Roberto's secret wasn't the money itself, but the isolation it created. I couldn't share my amazement with anyone, couldn't seek advice about managing sudden wealth, couldn't even Google what to do with $400 million without feeling paranoid about digital footprints. Margaret Chen had introduced me to a discreet financial advisor, a soft-spoken man named James who specialized in clients who needed to maintain low profiles while building their portfolios. Your great-uncle chose his investments wisely, James explained during our first meeting in his understated downtown office. The bulk of the portfolio is in long-term growth assets, mining operations that will generate revenue for decades, real estate in markets that are still appreciating, technology companies that Roberto identified before they went public. He showed me spreadsheets and projections that painted a picture of wealth that would continue growing whether I touched it or not. Conservative estimates suggested my net worth would top $500 million within 5 years. The numbers were so abstract they felt like fantasy, like playing Monopoly with someone else's money. "What would you like to do with it?" James asked. The question caught me off guard. In my world, money was something you earned through sweat and skill, something you spent on necessities and saved for emergencies. The concept of deciding what to do with hundreds of millions was like being asked to plan a vacation to Mars. "I want to help people," I said finally. But quietly, without anyone knowing where it comes from. James smiled, the first genuine emotion I'd seen from him. Roberto would approve. He funded 3 orphanages in Colombia and a technical school in Chile, never put his name on any of them. Just quiet generosity that changed lives. That conversation planted the seed of an idea that would grow throughout my year of silence. If I couldn't tell anyone about my wealth, I could at least use it to help others while maintaining my cover as a struggling craftsman. The Seattle area was full of people who needed a hand up, families facing eviction, small business owners drowning in debt, students who couldn't afford college tuition. Through shell companies and anonymous donations, I could make a difference without breaking Roberto's rules. The first family I helped was completely accidental. Mrs. Patterson, who ran the corner bakery near my shop, mentioned during casual conversation that she was 3 months behind on rent. The building's owner was threatening eviction, and she didn't know how she'd tell her employees they'd be losing their jobs before Christmas. I made a note of her landlord's name and had James arrange for an anonymous payment to bring her account current, plus 6 months in advance. 2 weeks later, Mrs. Patterson was practically glowing when I stopped in for my usual coffee and muffin. A miracle happened, she told me, tears streaming down her flour-dusted cheeks. Someone anonymous paid my back rent and gave me 6 months breathing room. Can you believe it? In this economy, someone still believes in helping small businesses. I bought an extra muffin and walked back to my shop with a lightness in my step I hadn't felt since signing those divorce papers. The money in my accounts was abstract, but Mrs. Patterson's relief was real. Her employees would keep their jobs, her customers would keep their morning ritual, and the neighborhood would keep its heart. For the first time, Roberto's fortune felt like a tool rather than a burden. Over the following months I developed a system. Small acts of anonymous kindness that flew under any radar. A young mother's medical bills mysteriously paid in full, a high school senior's college tuition fund suddenly receiving a large donation from an unnamed benefactor, a veteran's nonprofit finding an envelope of cash in their mailbox with no return address. Each act was small enough to avoid attention but large enough to change lives. Elena remained oblivious to my double life, which was exactly how it needed to be. She was busy building her new existence with Marcus, posting photos from wine tastings and gallery openings, her social media presence carefully curated to showcase a lifestyle that would have been impossible with a small business owner husband. She looked happy in those photos, or at least she looked successful, which seemed to be the same thing in her mind. Sofia continued to split her time between two worlds. Weekdays in Elena's modern apartment, surrounded by minimalist furniture and the constant hum of Elena's business calls. Weekends in my workshop, learning to use chisels and sanders, understanding how something beautiful could emerge from patience and skill. She never complained about the arrangement, but I could see the questions forming in her intelligent eyes. One Saturday afternoon, while we worked on refinishing a vintage rocking chair I'd found at an estate sale, Sofia asked the question I'd been dreading. "Daddy, why don't you have as much money as Mommy's friend Marcus?" I set down my brush and looked at my daughter, saw Elena's dark eyes and my own stubborn chin, and realized this was a defining moment in more ways than one. I could tell her that money wasn't important, that Mommy had made different choices, that success came in many forms. All of those things were true, but they weren't complete. Sometimes, I said carefully, people have more than they show, and sometimes they show more than they have. The most important thing isn't how much money someone has. It's what they do with whatever they've been given. Sofia nodded thoughtfully, then returned her attention to the rocking chair. "This chair will be beautiful when we're done," she said, "even if it doesn't cost as much as Marcus's car." I hugged her then, breathing in the scent of wood stain and childhood shampoo, marveling at how a 7-year-old could understand truths that escaped many adults. She was right about the chair. It would be beautiful because we were creating it together, because we were putting love and skill and patience into every stroke of the brush. That kind of beauty couldn't be purchased at any price. As the months passed, my secret life grew more complex. James helped me establish a charitable foundation, carefully structured to hide my involvement while maximizing its impact. The Torres Foundation for Working Families provided grants for small business owners, emergency assistance for families facing crisis, and scholarships for students whose dreams exceeded their bank accounts. On paper, the funding came from a consortium of anonymous donors. In reality, it came from a mining operation in Chile that my great-uncle had established 30 years earlier. The foundation's first major project was renovating a community center in South Seattle, a neighborhood where families struggled with poverty and children needed safe places to spend after school hours. I visited the site after hours, walking through rooms that would soon house homework help and art programs, job training workshops and family counseling services. The contractor mentioned that whoever was funding the project had requested it be completed to the highest standards, no corners cut, no compromises on quality. Standing in that empty building, surrounded by the smell of fresh paint and possibility, I finally understood what Roberto had meant about proving character before revealing wealth. Anyone could write a check, but using money wisely required wisdom that couldn't be purchased. The year of silence wasn't punishment or arbitrary delay, it's preparation for a responsibility larger than I'd initially grasped. My workshop remained my sanctuary throughout the strange double life that year required. Each morning, I'd unlock the door and breathe in the familiar scent of cedar and oak, letting my hands remember the rhythm of creation that had sustained me since childhood. Regular customers still brought me their projects, still paid me modest sums for custom pieces that would outlast us all. Mrs. Chen commissioned a bookshelf for her law office. The Hendersons needed a dining table for their growing family. Each project grounded me in the life I'd always known, even as my bank account swelled with investments and returns I'd never imagined possible. The irony of my situation wasn't lost on me. Elena had left because she thought I had no financial future, that a craftsman who worked with his hands could never provide the security she craved. Meanwhile, I was quietly becoming one of the wealthiest men in the Pacific Northwest, all while maintaining the humble exterior that had driven her away. Some days, the secret felt like vindication. Other days, it felt like a cosmic joke played at everyone's expense. The most difficult moments came when Sofia would mention something she wanted but couldn't have, some toy or experience that Elena deemed too expensive for a woodworker's budget. I had the power to give my daughter anything she desired, to ensure she never wanted for anything, but Roberto's rules kept me imprisoned in artificial limitations. Watching her accept disappointment with grace beyond her years, I sometimes wondered if the inheritance was a blessing or a curse, but then I'd remember Mrs. Patterson's tears of relief, or the thank you note from a single mother whose rent had been mysteriously paid, or the photos of children playing in the community center that anonymous donations had brought back to life. The money wasn't really mine. I began to understand. It was a tool I'd been entrusted with, a responsibility that required wisdom and humility in equal measure. 9 months into my year of silence, Elena's relationship with Marcus began showing cracks. Sofia mentioned that Mommy seemed stressed lately, that Marcus had been traveling more for business, that their planned vacation to Italy had been postponed indefinitely. I didn't probe for details, but I couldn't help noticing that Elena's social media posts became less frequent, her smiles and photographs less radiant. Through my financial advisor's contacts, I learned that Marcus's venture capital fund was struggling. Several of his major investments had failed to perform as projected, and rumors circulated about leveraged positions that left him vulnerable to market fluctuations. The $500 million fund that Elena had found so impressive was built on borrowed money and optimistic projections rather than solid assets. I felt no satisfaction in Marcus's troubles, only a strange sort of sadness for Elena. She'd thought she was trading up for security and status, but she'd attached herself to someone whose wealth was as fragile as morning frost. My inheritance, despite its restrictions and complications, was built on tangible assets, mines producing actual minerals, buildings housing actual tenants, companies creating actual products. Roberto had understood the difference between real wealth and impressive facades. The year of silence was drawing to a close when the community center held its grand reopening. I attended the ceremony as Nathan Torres, local craftsman, watching politicians and community leaders cut ribbons and make speeches about anonymous generosity bringing hope to an underserved neighborhood. Children ran through halls that my money had restored, their laughter echoing off walls that would witness thousands of success stories in the years to come. Standing at the back of the crowd, Sofia's hand in mine, I felt a satisfaction deeper than any custom furniture commission had ever provided. This was what money could accomplish when used wisely, not personal luxury or status symbols, but genuine improvement in people's lives. Roberto's year of silence had taught me the difference between having wealth and understanding it. The anniversary of my divorce arrived like a quiet storm. 1 year since Elena had walked away with custody papers and contempt for my small dreams. 1 year since I'd discovered that my great-uncle had left me more money than entire cities possessed in their budgets. In 24 hours, Margaret Chen would call to inform me that Roberto's confidentiality period had expired, that I was free to live as an openly wealthy man. But as I tucked Sofia into bed that night, listening to her excited chatter about the jewelry box we'd finally finished, I realized that revealing my fortune would change everything between us. She loved me for the weekend father who taught her woodworking and took her for ice cream, not for any money I might possess. Elena had chosen Marcus over me based solely on financial considerations. Did I really want to discover whether anyone could love me for reasons other than my bank balance? The phone call came at exactly 9 o'clock the next morning. Margaret Chen's voice was crisp and professional as always, but I detected a note of curiosity underneath. "Mr. Torres, as of today, you are free to disclose your inheritance to whomever you choose. The confidentiality period has officially expired. How would you like to proceed?" I stood in my workshop, surrounded by the tools and projects that had sustained me through the strangest year of my life, and gave her an answer that surprised us both. "I'd like to extend the silence a little longer, Margaret. I'm not ready yet." The decision felt right as soon as I spoke it. Roberto's money had taught me that wealth was responsibility, not freedom. It had shown me the satisfaction of helping others without seeking credit, of making a difference through actions rather than announcements. Most importantly, it had proven that I could be trusted with power that could corrupt or elevate, depending on how it was wielded. But even as I chose to maintain my secret, events beyond my control were already in motion. Elena's world with Marcus was crumbling faster than she could repair it, and soon she would be forced to confront the choices she'd made when she walked away from a man she thought had nothing to offer. The reckoning was coming, whether I was ready or not. The first crack in Marcus's empire appeared on a Wednesday morning when the Seattle Times ran a small article buried on page 6 of the business section. Hendricks Capital Partners was facing scrutiny from federal regulators regarding questionable accounting practices in their third-quarter filings. The language was careful, legal, but anyone who understood venture capital knew what those sanitized phrases really meant. Marcus was in trouble. I read the article twice while drinking coffee in my workshop. The newspaper spread across the same workbench where Elena had dropped our divorce papers 13 months earlier. Sofia was at school, Elena was at Marcus's downtown office for what she described as an important strategy meeting, and I was alone with the knowledge that the man she'd chosen over me was about to lose everything. The irony should have felt satisfying, but it didn't. Instead, I felt a strange sadness for Elena, who had tied her future to someone whose wealth was built on leveraged dreams rather than solid foundations. She'd wanted security, and had instead chosen the most insecure situation possible, a house of cards that was finally beginning to collapse in the autumn wind. My phone buzzed with a text from Sofia. "Daddy, can we work on the birdhouse this weekend? Mommy says she might be busy." I smiled despite the weight of the morning's revelations. My daughter's weekend projects had become the anchor points of my week, moments of pure creation that reminded me why I'd fallen in love with woodworking in the first place. Whatever storms were gathering around Elena and Marcus, Sofia and I would continue building beautiful things together. The Torres Foundation had grown beyond anything I'd initially imagined during that first year of secret generosity. What had started as anonymous help for struggling families had evolved into a comprehensive network of support programs throughout the Seattle area. James, my financial advisor, now managed a full-time staff dedicated to identifying and addressing community needs that other organizations overlooked. The Foundation's latest project was a vocational training center in Georgetown, designed to teach practical skills to adults looking to change careers or re-enter the workforce after unemployment. Former Boeing employees could learn advanced welding techniques. Single mothers could earn certifications in medical billing. Veterans could master the intricacies of solar panel installation. The program was free to participants, funded entirely by what the public believed was a coalition of anonymous donors but was actually proceeds from Roberto's mining operations in South America. I visited the training center every few weeks, ostensibly as Nathan Torres, local craftsman, who'd been hired to build custom workbenches for the woodworking program. In reality, I was checking on an investment that measured success in transformed lives rather than financial return. Walking through the welding lab, watching students master techniques that would lead to union jobs and stable incomes, I felt the same satisfaction I'd once derived from completing a perfect dovetail joint. Elena knew nothing about the Foundation, of course. In her mind, I remained the stubborn craftsman who'd chosen wood shavings over financial ambition, who'd been too proud or too foolish to adapt to a changing economy. She had no idea that her ex-husband now employed more people than Marcus's entire venture capital firm, that the modest workshop she'd dismissed supported programs serving thousands of Seattle families. The deception was becoming harder to maintain as my public profile grew despite my efforts to remain invisible. The local business journal had run another article about the mysterious benefactor transforming South Seattle through strategic investments in community infrastructure. Politicians wanted meetings, nonprofit leaders sought partnerships, reporters called my shop asking if I knew anything about the anonymous donor whose fingerprints seemed to be on every positive development in working-class neighborhoods. I deflected as best I could, playing the role of a simple craftsman who was too busy with furniture orders to pay much attention to city politics. But the questions were growing more specific, more persistent. Someone was connecting dots, following money trails, building a case that would eventually lead to my doorstep. The year of silence Roberto had demanded was over, but I'd chosen to extend it indefinitely. Now I wondered if that choice was about to be taken away from me. The second crack in Marcus's facade appeared the following week when 3 of his fund's largest investors quietly withdrew their commitments. The news didn't make the papers, but James heard about it through his network of financial professionals who traded information like baseball cards. Pension funds and university endowments were spooked by the federal investigation, unwilling to risk their reputations on a fund manager whose books weren't adding up correctly. Elena started showing signs of stress that even Sofia noticed. My daughter mentioned that mommy seemed tired lately, that she'd been getting a lot of phone calls that made her voice sound different, smaller somehow. When I picked Sofia up for our weekend visits, I could see the tension in Elena's posture, the way she held her shoulders like someone bracing for impact. "How's everything going with Marcus?" I asked one Friday evening, keeping my voice neutral as Sofia gathered her overnight bag from Elena's apartment. Elena's smile was too bright, too quick. "Wonderful. He's just dealing with some boring regulatory stuff. You know how the government likes to interfere with successful businesses." I nodded and didn't push, but I could see the cracks forming around her eyes. the small tells that indicated she was beginning to understand that her new life wasn't as secure as she'd believed. Part of me wanted to warn her, to explain that Marcus's problems were deeper than routine regulatory harassment, but doing so would require revealing knowledge I wasn't supposed to possess, connections I couldn't explain without exposing my own secret. That weekend, Sofia and I finished the birdhouse she'd been designing for 3 months, made from cedar with a copper roof that would age to a beautiful green patina. It was architecture in miniature, complete with tiny shutters and a front porch smaller than a postage stamp. Sofia had carved her own phoenix in the base, just like I'd taught her, marking her creation with the symbol that had become our family signature. "Where should we hang it, Daddy?" she asked, holding the finished piece up to catch the afternoon light streaming through the workshop windows. "Wherever you think the birds will be happiest," I replied, watching her face as she considered the question seriously. She chose a maple tree in my backyard, high enough to discourage cats but visible from the kitchen window where we could watch for residents. As I held her steady on the ladder, she secured the birdhouse to a sturdy branch, her small hands confident with the drill I'd taught her to use safely. "The birds don't know how much this cost to make, do they?" she said, climbing down with the satisfaction of a job completed. "No," I agreed. "They just know whether it's a good home or not." Sofia nodded thoughtfully, already understanding at age 8 what many adults never grasped. Value wasn't determined by price tags or appraisals, but by how well something served its purpose, how much love had gone into its creation, how long it would last in a world that seemed increasingly disposable. The third crack in Marcus's empire became a chasm when the Seattle Times ran a front-page story about federal investigators seizing documents from Hendricks Capital Partners. The headline was stark: "Local VC firm under investigation for investment fraud." The accompanying photo showed Marcus leaving his downtown office, his usual confident smile replaced by the grim expression of someone who'd run out of ways to spin bad news into positive narratives. I read the article while Sofia ate breakfast, her chatter about an upcoming school field trip providing counterpoint to the devastating details laid out in careful journalistic prose. Marcus had allegedly been using funds from new investors to pay returns to earlier investors, a classic Ponzi scheme dressed up in venture capital terminology. The investigation had been ongoing for months, building cases against multiple individuals who'd used Seattle's tech boom to mask old-fashioned theft. Elena called me that afternoon, her voice shaky in a way I hadn't heard since the early days of our marriage when she'd been unsure about starting her interior design business. "Nathan, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." "Of course. If something happened, if I needed help with Sofia for a while, could you handle full custody? I mean, I know money is tight for you, but could you manage?" The question hit me harder than I'd expected. Elena was preparing for disaster, realizing that her carefully constructed new life might collapse and leave Sofia caught in the debris. She was swallowing her pride, admitting that the man she'd left for being financially unstable might be more reliable than the millionaire she'd chosen as his replacement. "Sofia will always have a home with me," I said. "Whatever happens, she'll be safe and loved and taken care of. You don't need to worry about that." Elena was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke again her voice was thick with emotions I couldn't quite identify. "Thank you. I know I don't have any right to ask after everything, but thank you." After hanging up, I sat in my workshop trying to process the conversation. Elena was scared, genuinely frightened for the first time since I'd known her. The woman who'd walked away from our marriage with such confidence was now asking her ex-husband to be her safety net, the stable foundation she could count on when everything else crumbled. The next week brought a cascade of bad news for Marcus and anyone associated with him. The federal investigation expanded to include charges of money laundering and securities fraud. Bank accounts were frozen, assets were seized. The $500 million fund that had impressed Elena so much turned out to be largely fictional, built on inflated valuations and creative accounting that couldn't withstand regulatory scrutiny. Elena's social media presence, once filled with photos from gallery openings and wine tastings, went silent. She stopped posting pictures of her downtown apartment, stopped checking in at expensive restaurants, stopped tagging Marcus in romantic vacation photos. The digital trail of her upgraded lifestyle simply vanished, as if she'd realized that broadcasting wealth built on fraud wasn't wise when federal investigators were building criminal cases. Sofia began spending more time at my house, even on weekday evenings when she was supposed to be with Elena. She'd arrive with homework and overnight bags, explaining that mommy was having lots of meetings and thought she'd be more comfortable doing her schoolwork in the quiet of my workshop rather than Elena's apartment where the phone rang constantly. I didn't question these arrangements, just made sure Sofia had everything she needed and helped with math problems and science projects while she sat at a child-sized workbench I'd built specifically for her use. She'd grown taller over the past year, her fingers more dexterous with tools, her understanding of measurements and angles more sophisticated. Working alongside her in the evenings, I could almost pretend we were a normal father and daughter spending time together, rather than a family fractured by divorce and held together by circumstance. The Torres Foundation continued its work throughout Marcus's very public downfall, launching new programs and expanding existing ones with funds that Marcus could never have imagined. The Vocational Training Center graduated its first class of students, 37 adults who walked across a makeshift stage in Georgetown to receive certificates that represented new careers and second chances. I watched from the back of the room as former Boeing workers and displaced retail employees shook hands with instructors and posed for photos with family members who'd supported them through months of study. Among the graduates was Maria, a single mother of 3 who'd learned medical coding after losing her restaurant job during the pandemic. She'd enrolled in the program 8 months earlier, skeptical that anything free could be worthwhile, convinced there must be hidden costs or catches that would eventually surface. Instead, she'd found a comprehensive support system that included not just technical training but child care assistance, transportation vouchers, and career counseling that helped her land a job with a major hospital system. "I don't know who's funding this program," she said during her graduation speech, "but whoever you are, you've given me my future back. You've given my children a mother who doesn't have to choose between paying rent and buying groceries." Sitting in that auditorium, listening to Maria's words, I finally understood what Roberto had meant about proving character before revealing wealth. Anyone could write a check, but using money to change lives required patience, humility, and the wisdom to understand that the best philanthropy was invisible to those it helped. The graduates didn't need to know my name to benefit from programs I'd funded. Their success was reward enough. Elena's apartment was repossessed on a Tuesday morning in November. Sofia mentioned it casually while we worked on a jewelry box designed to hold her growing collection of handmade treasures, explaining that mommy had moved to a smaller place and they were going to stay with a friend for a while until things got sorted out. "Are you worried?" I asked, studying her face for signs of anxiety or confusion. Sofia considered the question with the seriousness she brought to all our conversations. "Mommy seems scared, but she's trying not to show it. She keeps saying everything will be fine, but her voice sounds different when she says it." I felt my chest tighten with protectiveness for both Sofia and Elena. Whatever mistakes Elena had made, whatever poor choices had led to her current situation, she didn't deserve to face financial ruin while trying to shield our daughter from the worst of it. The woman who'd once criticized my modest income was now discovering what real financial insecurity felt like, and the lesson was harsher than anything I would have wished on her. That evening, after Sofia had gone to bed in the room I'd always kept ready for her, I called Elena. She answered on the first ring, her voice tight with exhaustion. "How are you holding up?" I asked. "I'm fine. We're fine, just some temporary complications while Marcus deals with his legal situation, Elena." She was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke again, the pretense was gone. "I'm scared, Nathan. I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know how I'm going to take care of Sofia if this gets worse. You don't have to handle this alone. Whatever you need, whatever Sofia needs, we'll figure it out. Why are you being so kind to me? After everything I put you through, after the things I said, why aren't you enjoying this?" The question caught me off guard, forcing me to examine motivations I hadn't fully acknowledged. Why wasn't I satisfied by Elena's reversal of fortune? Why did her pain cause me pain instead of vindication? "Because watching you suffer doesn't make Sofia safer or happier," I said finally. "Because being cruel to the mother of my daughter would make me someone I don't want to be." Elena started crying then, quiet sobs that carried years of regret and current fear in equal measure. "I made such a huge mistake, Nathan. I thought I was choosing security, but I was really choosing danger. I thought you were holding us back, but you were the only solid ground we had." I listened without commenting, understanding that she needed to voice these realizations for herself rather than hear them validated by me. Elena had always been proud, self-assured to a fault. Admitting error required more courage than walking away had demanded, and I could hear the cost of that courage in every word. Marcus's criminal trial began in December, a media spectacle that transformed him from successful venture capitalist to cautionary tale in the span of a few weeks. Local news stations ran footage of him arriving at the federal courthouse each morning, his designer suits and confident posture gradually giving way to rumpled clothing and the hunched shoulders of someone who'd stopped believing in his own narratives. Elena attended the first few days of testimony, sitting in the gallery with other victims and associates trying to understand how their investments had vanished into shell companies and offshore accounts. She stopped going after the third day, when prosecutors began detailing the lavish lifestyle Marcus had funded through investor money, the penthouse apartments and exotic vacations that had impressed her so much when she believed they represented legitimate success. Sofia spent most of December at my house, her mother's situation too unstable to maintain their previous custody arrangement. Elena would visit for dinner or weekend afternoons, looking tired and older, wearing clothes I recognized from our marriage rather than the designer pieces that had marked her transformation into Marcus's girlfriend. She was gracious and grateful, never demanding or presumptuous, as if she understood that my willingness to help was a gift rather than an obligation. One evening, while Sofia worked on homework at the kitchen table and Elena helped with dinner preparations, I found myself studying the woman I'd once loved completely. The expensive highlights had grown out, revealing silver threads at her temples that somehow made her look more beautiful rather than less. The manicured nails were shorter now, practical rather than decorative. She moved through my kitchen with familiar efficiency, remembering where I kept the good knives and how I liked vegetables chopped for stir-fry. "This feels strange," she said, catching me watching her. "Good strange or bad strange, complicated strange. Like stepping back into a life that fits better than the one I chose to replace it." We ate dinner together, the three of us, Sofia chattering about her latest art project while Elena and I maintained carefully polite conversation about practical matters. Custody schedules and school events, medical appointments and holiday plans. The domestic rhythm we'd once shared, now reconstructed around the careful boundaries of divorce and mutual respect. After Sofia went to bed, Elena lingered in the kitchen, drying dishes with a deliberateness that suggested she was gathering courage for something difficult. "I need to tell you something," she said finally. "Marcus is going to prison. His lawyers think he's looking at 10 to 15 years for fraud and money laundering. All his assets are being seized to compensate investors. Everything he showed me, everything I thought was real, it was all stolen from other people." I nodded, having already learned these details through James's financial network, but not wanting to reveal knowledge I shouldn't possess. "I lost everything, Nathan. The apartment, the car, the jewelry, all of it. I don't even have enough saved to rent a decent place for Sofia and me. I'm going to have to start over completely, and I don't know how to do that at 42. "You're not starting from nothing," I said. "You have skills, experience, a successful design business you built before Marcus. You have people who respect your work and trust your judgment. Most importantly, you have Sofia, and she needs her mother to be strong." Elena set down the dish towel and looked at me directly for the first time in months. "How do you do it?" "Do what?" "Stay positive when everything falls apart, find hope when there's no reason to believe things will get better. You lost everything too when I left, but you never seemed bitter or defeated. You just kept working, kept being a good father, kept believing in something I couldn't see." The question forced me to confront the central irony of the past 18 months. Elena thought I'd lost everything when she left, had no idea I'd gained a fortune the same night our marriage ended. She saw my resilience as proof of character, but how much of that character was real when it was supported by wealth she couldn't imagine? "I had Sofia," I said, which was true even if it wasn't complete. As long as she was safe and happy, I had everything that really mattered. Money comes and goes, but being her father is permanent. That gave me something to build on. Elena smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from her since Marcus's troubles began. "She adores you, you know, talks about you constantly, shows off things you've taught her to make. She's so proud of being your daughter, of learning skills most kids never get a chance to master. She's an incredible kid, you should be proud of the job you've done raising her. We did together, before I got so focused on things that didn't matter and forgot what did." The conversation hung between us, heavy with implications neither of us was ready to address directly. Elena was acknowledging mistakes, expressing gratitude, maybe even testing whether bridges could be rebuilt that she'd burned so thoroughly. But trust, once broken, required more than words to repair, and I was still carrying secrets that made any honest relationship impossible. Marcus was convicted on 14 counts of securities fraud and sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. The verdict made front-page news in the Seattle Times, complete with photos of him being led away in handcuffs, and quotes from prosecutors calling it one of the largest investment scams in Pacific Northwest history. Elena wasn't mentioned in the coverage, but everyone who knew her understood that she'd been collateral damage in Marcus's criminal enterprise. With Marcus definitively out of her life, Elena began the slow process of rebuilding. She moved into a small apartment in Ballard, furnished with pieces from thrift stores and garage sales rather than expensive showrooms. She took on freelance design projects, working from a laptop at her kitchen table instead of a downtown office with a receptionist in mahogany conference rooms. Sofia adapted to the changes with the resilience children somehow manage even when adults fall apart. She spent weekdays with Elena, weekends with me, and seemed to understand instinctively that both parents were doing their best under difficult circumstances. She never complained about Elena's smaller apartment or asked why mommy couldn't afford the things she used to buy. Instead, she focused on the constants: school friends, weekend woodworking projects, the birdhouse that had attracted a family of wrens who returned each spring. The Torres Foundation expanded again as Seattle's economy recovered from the pandemic recession. The Vocational Training Center added programs in sustainable construction and urban agriculture, responding to growing demand for green jobs that couldn't be outsourced or automated. The Community Center in Georgetown hosted job fairs and financial literacy workshops, art classes for children, and computer training for seniors. Each program was carefully designed to address specific needs James's staff had identified through community surveys and demographic analysis. Rather than imposing solutions from outside, the foundation listened to residents and responded with resources that amplified existing strengths. Former gang members became construction instructors. Unemployed teachers launched tutoring programs. Retired nurses provided health screenings in neighborhoods where medical care was scarce or expensive. The foundation's invisibility was becoming harder to maintain as its impact grew more obvious. Reporters investigated the anonymous donors transforming South Seattle, following money trails that led to shell companies and offshore accounts designed to protect privacy. Politicians wanted to claim credit for improvements in their districts. Nonprofits sought partnerships with whoever was funding the wave of positive change. I deflected questions and avoided publicity, but I could sense the net closing around my secret. Someone persistent and clever would eventually connect the dots between Nathan Torres, modest craftsman, and the mysterious benefactor whose generosity had transformed working-class communities across the region. When that revelation came, everything about my carefully constructed double life would change. Elena and I found ourselves spending more time together as her life stabilized and Sofia required coordination between two households: school events and medical appointments, birthday parties and summer camp decisions. The practical business of co-parenting gradually evolved into something resembling friendship, built on shared concern for Sofia's well-being and mutual respect for the people we'd each become since our marriage ended. She'd grown more thoughtful during her time with Marcus, less focused on material markers of success and more interested in authentic connections. Her design work reflected the change, emphasizing functionality and sustainability over expensive finishes and trendy accessories. Clients appreciated her practical approach and honest pricing, leading to referrals and repeat business that provided steady if modest income. I used to think success meant impressing other people, she told me one evening after Sofia's school concert, where our daughter had performed a piano piece she'd been practicing for months. Now I think it means being proud of the work you do and the person you're becoming. We were walking to our cars in the school parking lot, the early darkness of winter making the evening feel more intimate than it was. Other parents called goodbyes, families dispersing to homework and bedtime routines, the ordinary rhythms of middle-class life that Elena had once dismissed as insufficient. Sofia's lucky to have you figuring that out while she's still young enough to learn from your example, I said. Elena paused beside her car, a practical sedan that had replaced Marcus's expensive imports. Do you think she'll forgive me for all the mistakes? For choosing Marcus over her family, for putting her through the instability of the past year? She loves you completely, I said. Kids are remarkably good at loving their parents despite their flaws, not because they're perfect. Even when those flaws cause real damage, I thought about the question, about the damage my own secrets might cause when they were inevitably revealed. especially then. Forgiveness isn't about pretending mistakes didn't happen, it's about choosing to love someone anyway, choosing to believe they can do better. Elena smiled, but I could see tears gathering in her eyes. I hope I get the chance to prove worthy of that kind of forgiveness. As spring approached, 2 years after our divorce, I found myself at a crossroads I hadn't anticipated. Elena was rebuilding her life with remarkable grace, Sofia was thriving despite the disruptions she'd endured, and the Torres Foundation was making measurable improvements in communities across Seattle. But my secret was becoming unsustainable, the weight of hidden wealth growing heavier as the people around me struggled with ordinary financial challenges. Elena mentioned during one of our co-parenting conversations that she was worried about Sofia's college expenses, already trying to calculate how much she could save over the next 10 years to ensure their daughter could attend university without crushing debt. I had the power to eliminate that worry entirely, to guarantee Sofia's education and Elena's security with a single phone call to James, but doing so would require explanations I wasn't prepared to give, revelations that would change how both of them saw me forever. The community center held its 3rd anniversary celebration on a rainy Saturday in April, the building packed with families whose lives had been touched by programs I'd quietly funded. Children ran through halls where after-school tutoring had helped them catch up with grade-level reading. Parents networked at job fairs that had connected them with employers offering living wages. Seniors attended fitness classes designed for their specific needs, socializing with neighbors who'd become genuine friends. I attended as Nathan Torres, local craftsman, who'd donated some custom shelving for the children's library. Elena came with Sofia, who'd been asked to display some of her woodworking projects in an exhibit celebrating young artists. We stood together in the crowded lobby, watching our daughter explain her jewelry box to admiring visitors, her confidence and articulation making us both proud. "She gets that from you," Elena said, nodding toward Sofia as she demonstrated the hidden compartment she'd designed for her most precious treasures. The patience to create something beautiful, the pride in workmanship, the ability to teach others what she's learned. "She gets her artistic eye from you," I replied. "And her determination to keep trying until she gets something exactly right." We were both right, of course. Sofia was the best of both of us, shaped by love that had survived the failure of our marriage and grown stronger through the challenges we'd faced separately and together. Watching her that afternoon, surrounded by a community that was thriving partly because of resources I'd provided in secret, I felt the weight of decisions I could no longer postpone. That night, after Sofia had gone to sleep in her weekend bedroom, I sat in my workshop surrounded by projects in various stages of completion. A rocking chair for new grandparents, a dining table for a young family, a bookshelf designed to hold someone's lifetime collection of mystery novels. Each piece represented relationship with customers who trusted me with their domestic dreams, who paid modest amounts for furniture that would outlast anything available in department stores. This was the life Elena had found inadequate, the identity she'd dismissed as small and limited, but it was also the foundation that had sustained me through the strange journey of the past 2 years, the authentic core that had made Roberto's wealth meaningful rather than corrupting. The question now was whether I could integrate these two parts of myself, whether Nathan Torres the craftsman and Nathan Torres the philanthropist could exist as the same person. The answer would determine not just my own future, but Sofia's and Elena's as well. They deserved truth, even if that truth complicated everything they thought they understood about the man who'd been left behind and the life he'd built from the wreckage of their family. The Seattle Times headline stretched across the front page in bold letters, "Local craftsman revealed as anonymous philanthropist, behind $50 million community investment." My photo filled half the page, taken at the community center's anniversary celebration without my knowledge. The reporter had traced shell companies, followed donation patterns, and connected dots I'd thought were safely scattered. Elena called within minutes of the paper hitting newsstands. Her voice was shaking, confused. "Nathan, there's a mistake in the paper. They're saying you're some kind of millionaire philanthropist. This is crazy, right? You need to call them and demand a retraction." I stood in my workshop, surrounded by the tools and projects that had defined me for 15 years, holding a newspaper that had just ended my double life forever. "Elena, we need to talk. Can you bring Sofia over? There are things I need to explain to both of you." The silence stretched so long I thought she'd hung up. When she spoke again, her voice was barely a whisper. "Oh my God, it's true, isn't it? They arrived an hour later, Sofia bouncing through the workshop door like always, Elena following with the expression of someone walking into a courtroom for sentencing. My daughter hugged me, chattering about her school day, oblivious to the newspaper tucked under her mother's arm or the tension radiating from every adult in the room. "Sweetheart," I said, lifting Sofia onto her favorite stool, "remember how we always talked about surprises, and how some surprises are good and some are complicated? Well, Daddy has a complicated surprise to share with you and Mommy." Sofia's eyes went wide with the anticipation children bring to any mystery. Elena stood frozen by the door, clutching the newspaper like evidence of a crime she couldn't quite believe had been committed. 2 years ago, I began choosing words carefully. My great-uncle Roberto died and left me a lot of money, more money than we'd ever imagined, but he made me promise to keep it secret for a whole year, to prove I could handle it responsibly. Like a test, Sofia asked, her 8-year-old mind grasping concepts that adults often struggled with, exactly like a test.
And after that year was over, I decided to keep the secret a little longer to make sure I was using the money to help people instead of just buying expensive things. Elena found her voice raw and accusatory. "How much money, Nathan?" "About $400 million. Elena's knees buckled. She grabbed the doorframe for support, her face cycling through disbelief, anger, and something that looked like grief. Sofia, meanwhile, was processing this information with the adaptability that made children remarkable. "So you're really rich, Daddy? Like castle rich?" "I have a lot of money, yes, but we live the same way we always have because money doesn't change who we are inside." "Is that why you built the birdhouse so carefully? Because you wanted it to be perfect even though you could afford to buy 1,000,000 birdhouses?" I felt my throat tighten. "That's exactly why, sweetheart." Elena pushed herself away from the doorframe, her composure returning in fragments. "You let me lose everything. You watched Marcus destroy my life, watched me worry about paying rent and Sofia's school expenses, and you said nothing. You have $400 million and you let your own daughter's mother struggle to buy groceries." "Elena, no." Her voice was gaining strength, fueled by anger I probably deserved. "You let me believe I'd married a man with no ambition, no future. You let me think Marcus was offering something you couldn't provide. All this time you had more wealth than he ever dreamed of, and you said nothing." Sofia looked between us, confusion replacing excitement. The adults were fighting again, their voices sharp with emotions she couldn't fully understand. I realized this moment would shape how she saw both parents, how she understood truth and secrets and the complexity of adult relationships. "Mommy," Sofia said, her young voice cutting through our tension, "Daddy helped lots of people with his secret money. The newspaper says he built schools and helped families. That's good, right?" Elena knelt beside our daughter, smoothing her dark hair with shaking hands. "Yes, baby. Helping people is always good. Mommy and Daddy just need to talk about some grown-up things. But we're still a family, right? Even with the secret money." I looked at Elena, saw her struggling with revelations that had upended everything she thought she knew about the past 2 years. My wealth made her choices look different, more foolish perhaps, but also more understandable. She'd left me for financial security and found bankruptcy. She'd chosen Marcus over me and discovered his fortune was stolen. The irony was so complete it felt scripted by a cruel universe. "We're still a family," I said firmly. "Money doesn't change that. Love doesn't change because of bank accounts." Elena stood slowly, newspaper still crumpled in her fist. "I need time to process this. I need to understand what this means, what you've been thinking, all these months while I worried about basic survival. Take all the time you need. But Elena, I want you to know that I never enjoyed watching you struggle. I wanted to help, but I was afraid that revealing the truth would make everything worse. Worse than lying for 2 years." The question hung in the workshop air, heavy with implication. There was no good answer, no way to justify the deception that hadn't hurt people I loved. I'd chosen to protect my secret, rather than trust the people who mattered most, and that choice had consequences I was only beginning to understand. "I don't know," I admitted. "Maybe I was wrong. Maybe I should have told you everything from the beginning." Elena walked to the window, staring out at the birdhouse Sofia and I had hung in the maple tree. Wrens had built a nest inside, raised babies, returned each spring to the home we'd created. It was exactly what we'd hoped when we designed it together, a small perfect thing that served its purpose without fanfare. "I left you because I thought you had no vision, no dreams bigger than this workshop," she said finally. "But you were funding programs that changed thousands of lives.
You were helping people I never bothered to notice, solving problems I didn't know existed. She turned back to face us and I saw something new in her expression, not forgiveness, exactly, but recognition, understanding that the man she dismissed as small-minded had been working on a scale she'd never imagined. What happens now? She asked. Now we figure out how to be honest with each other, all of us, no more secrets. Sofia slipped down from her stool and took both our hands, her small fingers warm and certain. Can we still work on projects together, even with the secret money? I squeezed her hand. Always. The money doesn't change what's important. Elena looked at our daughter, then at me, and for the first time in 2 years, I saw the woman I'd fallen in love with 15 years earlier. Not the ambitious social climber who'd left me for Marcus, but the artist who'd sketched in my workshop while I shaped wood into furniture, who'd understood that creating something beautiful was its own reward. No more secrets, she agreed, her voice steady, despite everything we'd have to work through. Outside, the wrens were teaching their new babies to fly, preparing them for a world larger and more complex than any nest could contain. Inside my workshop, 3 people who'd been family, then strangers, then something more complicated were learning the same difficult lesson about growing beyond the spaces that had once seemed sufficient. The money would change things, inevitably, but the promises we made to each other that afternoon, the commitment to honesty and love regardless of bank accounts, those would matter more than any inheritance Roberto could have left behind. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up, just click and check them out.